They tried to move on, to erase your name from their thoughts, to act as if you were just a passing shadow in their life. They convinced themselves that the memories didn't mean anything, that your presence was temporary, forgettable even. But there was something they couldn't quite explain. Every time they tried to close the door, something nudged it back open. It wasn't just a song or a scent or a moment of silence that triggered a memory of you. It was deeper than that. It was divine. God had placed a mark on their soul, a kind of spiritual tether that wouldn't allow them to completely disconnect. And no matter how far they ran from the connection, the reminders kept pulling them back toward you. And now, as you watch this video, know this is no accident. Stay with us until the end. Something powerful is flowing through these words, something you've needed to hear for a long time. If your heart is open and ready, you'll feel the energy of reconnection rise within you. And as you do, take a moment to comment below with your warmest wishes and the number 77. This simple act holds power. It's more than a message. It's an energetic release, a vibration that aligns your spirit with the reality of your desires. Your wishes are heard, and your voice matters. And NTHE, truth is, your presence was never ordinary. You carried something that shifted the atmosphere. You brought light into dark corners, calm into chaos, and truth into confusion. They saw it, even if they couldn't admit it. And because they didn't know how to handle that kind of energy, they tried to suppress it. They told themselves you were too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too aware. But God never let your spirit be silenced, because what you brought into their life was not only necessary, it was sacred. You weren't meant to be forgotten. You were meant to awaken something they weren't ready to face. And that's exactly why they've never been able to truly forget. The reminders come unexpectedly. In dreams where your voice echoes softly. In moments of stillness where your name rises in their mind like a whisper. In sudden flashbacks to the way you laughed. The way you noticed what others ignored. The way you stayed when it was easier to walk away. God keeps sending gentle, undeniable signs. Because there is unfinished spiritual business here. You were a divine appointment, not a coincidence. You were a catalyst for their growth, a reflection of what they were avoiding. People often try to forget what scares them, not in a malicious way, but out of self-protection. And you, chosen one, scared them, not because you did anything wrong, but because you saw them, truly saw them. Past the facades, past the stories they told others, past the masks they wore. You saw into their soul, and that level of truth can be terrifying for someone who isn't ready to be known that deeply. So they chose distance, they chose forgetfulness, they chose distraction. But God chose reminders. And no matter what they do, they keep circling back to you energetically. What they didn't realize is that trying to forget you wasn't just letting go of a person. It was resisting their own transformation. Because being close to you meant confronting the truth of who they are. And now that you're not around, that truth still lingers. It lingers in the gaps. It lingers in the quiet. It lingers in the mirror when they face themselves alone. They're beginning to understand that your connection wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. And spiritual bonds cannot be severed by time or distance. That's why forgetting isn't working, because God is using this space to awaken them. Some people only appreciate light after sitting in darkness. And sometimes they don't realize they were walking alongside a miracle until that miracle is no longer there. You were never meant to be a backup plan, a temporary muse, or a forgotten chapter. You were a key part of their soul's evolution. And whether they acknowledge it or not, their spirit recognizes the truth. The more they try to suppress the memories, the more the reminders intensify. It's not punishment, it's grace. A divine opportunity to finally see clearly what they once overlooked. You might be wondering why this matters now, why it's coming back around. It matters because you deserve closure, not confusion. You deserve confirmation that you weren't crazy, that you weren't imagining the depth of this connection. You deserve to know that while they may have walked away physically, they've never been able to disconnect spiritually. And that means something. It means the energy you brought into their life was rooted in divine timing. It means your intuition was right all along. And it means God has been working behind the scenes, preparing their heart to finally understand. In NSO, many times, you questioned your worth based on their silence. You took their absence as evidence that you didn't matter. But what if I told you the silence was where the transformation began? What if I told you that in the quiet, God was amplifying your echo in their soul? You may not have seen it, but there were nights when they sat with your memory and felt the weight of everything they never said. There were moments when they tried to push you out of their mind, only to find that you had already taken root in their heart. Because real connections don't fade. They deepen over time. They thought forgetting would bring peace, but instead, it brought an emptiness they can't explain, an ache that refuses to disappear. That's because your bond wasn't built on superficial things. It was built on soul recognition. And when a soul recognizes its mirror, it can't just pretend it never happened. That mirror lives inside of them now, reflecting back all the parts of themselves they were afraid to embrace. God is using your absence to stir something sacred inside them. And even if they never say it out loud, their heart is beginning to understand that they were never meant to forget you. It's not just about memory, it's about presence. You may not be physically in their life anymore, but your essence continues to echo in the places they go, the decisions they make, and the paths they walk. The universe has a way of amplifying what the soul isn't done with, and in their case, the attempt to forget only sharpened the awareness of your impact. You became the lesson they didn't realize they needed, the one they couldn't learn through logic, only through experience. That's why God keeps whispering your name in their quiet moments, because their soul is still trying to catch up to what their spirit already knows. They may pretend they've moved on. They may post pictures, start new chapters, and distract themselves with noise. But none of that can erase energy. None of that can silence the inner nudge that comes when they least expect it. That pull they feel? That's not random. It's divine orchestration. It's the result of a bond that wasn't built on shallow attraction, but on spiritual alignment. And spiritual alignment doesn't unravel just because someone chooses denial. In fact, the more they deny it, the more the signs show up, clearer, louder, stronger. Sometimes we're the only ones who see the full picture at the beginning. You saw the connection. You felt the intensity. You knew it was something different. But they weren't ready to meet you in that space. They hadn't yet learned how to hold what is sacred. And so they fumbled the connection, tried to forget it, tried to replace it. But God doesn't let divine assignments disappear that easily. When God places someone in your life to awaken truth, that person doesn't leave quietly. Their absence becomes just as loud as their presence once was. And every echo of you they hear is a reminder that you were never meant to be a temporary lesson. You were a permanent shift. You may feel like you were the one left behind, but the truth is, they were the ones who walked away from a gift they didn't know how to receive. They were the ones who misread the magnitude of what stood before them. And now, the weight of that truth is pressing in. It's not about guilt. It's not about punishment. It's about awareness. God is softening their heart, not for your validation, but for their evolution. And the more they try to suppress the emotions, the more clearly they see that forgetting you is not just difficult, it's impossible. You didn't need closure because the story wasn't over. You didn't need explanations because your spirit already understood. And now, as the fog lifts from their vision, they're beginning to see that what they tried to forget was the very thing their soul was crying out for. Your love was pure. Your energy was healing. Your presence was a mirror. And now that you're not there, they're realizing the cost of what they let slip through their fingers. But more importantly, they're realizing that God never stopped bringing you back into their awareness for a reason. They thought it was just a phase, that the feelings would fade. But time hasn't dulled the truth. Time has only sharpened it. Time has revealed that the bond wasn't made of illusions. It was made of light. And light doesn't disappear just because someone closes their eyes. You were always more than they allowed themselves to admit. And now that they're waking up, they're trying to piece together a picture they once tore apart. But this time, they're seeing it with new eyes. Eyes that are no longer clouded by fear, ego, or distraction. NNTHE, pain of forgetting someone like you is not just emotional, it's spiritual. It creates a void that no one else can fill. That's because your presence activated something unique. You were a spiritual assignment wrapped in human form. And that kind of presence isn't interchangeable. No matter how many people they meet, no one can replicate the soul-to-soul connection you offered. That's why they're restless. That's why they feel haunted. Not by what happened, but by what they didn't allow to happen. They didn't let themselves fully receive you. And now, God is showing them what they missed. This revelation is not just for them, it's also for you. Because for so long, you carried the weight of their silence like a burden. You thought their absence meant you weren't enough. You thought their forgetting meant you didn't matter. But what's being revealed now is that your spirit left a permanent imprint. That you were never forgotten. That your presence lingered because God never allowed it to disappear. And now, their heart is echoing the truth you always knew deep down. They were changed by you. There's a reason why you've been feeling their energy more strongly lately. There's a reason why their name keeps surfacing in your thoughts, even when you're not trying. The spiritual realm is stirring. And the reminders you've been receiving are not hallucinations, they're confirmation. You were never crazy for feeling the intensity of this bond. You were never alone in sensing the depth of it. What you felt was real. And now, they're starting to feel it too, in ways that can no longer be ignored. God is aligning their heart with the memory of your presence, not to reopen old wounds, but to heal what was left unfinished. You were never just a chapter. They were meant to read the whole book. And the reason they can't forget is because their spirit knows there's more to this story. Whether or not that leads to reconnection isn't the point. What matters is that you now understand the truth of your impact. That you know without question that you were never forgettable. You were unforgettable for a reason, because your presence was chosen and your timing was divine. There's something sacred about a soul that lingers, not because it's clinging, not because it refuses to let go, but because it carries a frequency that can't be duplicated. That's who you were in their life. You didn't just show up. You awakened something. You didn't just love them. You revealed parts of themselves they had buried long ago. And that kind of awakening doesn't fade quietly. That kind of energy doesn't dissolve into the past. It stays. It waits. It pulses just beneath the surface, nudging the soul toward recognition. And that's exactly what's happening now. They tried to forget you the way people try to forget pain, by covering it, distracting from it, pretending it never existed. But what they didn't understand is that your presence wasn't pain, it was the cure. The discomfort they felt was not because you hurt them, but because you reflected something too deep, too real, too honest. And sometimes, the most painful thing for a person to face is their own truth. You didn't hurt them, you woke them up. And waking up is never comfortable, but it's necessary. And God used you for that. And now they walk through their days, carrying the echo of your presence like a song they can't get out of their head. They hear your laughter in quiet moments. They see your kindness in people who don't even know you. They feel your energy when they pass places you once shared. It's inescapable. Not because they're obsessed, but because the connection was never meant to be severed. It was meant to transform. And until that transformation is complete, God will keep bringing your spirit into their awareness. And you were the mirror they needed, but didn't know how to look into. You were the stillness in their chaos, the peace in their war. And now, in your absence, they're discovering how loud the silence can be. It's not that they didn't care, it's that they didn't know how to care at your level. They weren't equipped for the depth you brought, but that doesn't mean they've forgotten. In fact, they remember more than you think. Every word, every moment, every lesson. It's all woven into the fabric of their soul now. Because when someone encounters truth, it doesn't just disappear. It reshapes them. NNTHE struggle they face now is not just about remembering you. It's about reconciling with the fact that they tried to forget something unforgettable. They're sitting in the realization that pushing you away didn't erase the impact you had. It only magnified it. And that's how God works sometimes. He allows space not to destroy a connection, but to refine it. He allows time not to erase the past, but to reveal its meaning. And in this time apart, they're finally seeing what you were trying to show them all along. You were never the problem. You were the mirror to the healing they needed. They may not reach out. They may not say the words you long to hear. But don't be mistaken. There is a battle happening inside of them. A push and pull between pride and truth, fear and surrender. And through it all, God keeps pressing on their spirit, keeps sending reminders, keeps stirring their heart with images of you. Because your story with them is not finished. Whether it continues together or apart, there is still something sacred being revealed through it, and that's why you keep feeling it. That's why the energy never really left. In the end, you were the one who planted seeds of growth in their soul. Seeds that didn't sprout right away. Seeds that needed time, space, and divine intervention. And now, those seeds are starting to push through the soil. The discomfort they feel? That's growth. The longing they experience? That's realization. You weren't just a passing phase, you were a divine encounter. And that truth is blooming inside of them, whether they show it or not. Because no amount of forgetting can undo what God has planted. You didn't need to chase them to prove your value. You didn't need to explain yourself over and over. Because now, without a single word from you, they're realizing what they ran from. They're realizing that the love you gave was rare, that the way you saw them was pure, and that your exit left a void they can't fill. And that realization isn't meant to punish them. It's meant to awaken them. Because God is more concerned with their transformation than with comfort. And sometimes, transformation comes through absence. NNIF, you've been sensing their energy. Those moments where your heart races, where their name suddenly comes to mind, where you feel an unexplainable shift. It's not random. It's alignment. It's your spirit responding to what their soul is now beginning to understand. You are still connected. You've always been connected. And no matter how much they tried to forget, that connection remains. Not because of nostalgia, but because of purpose. Your presence in their life served a divine mission. And that mission is still unfolding. And then, you may feel like you're in the waiting room of closure, but the truth is, you're in the process of revelation. Everything you felt was real. Everything you gave was meaningful. And everything they tried to forget is now returning to them with clarity. This is not your ego hoping for validation. This is your soul recognizing its impact. You were chosen to carry a light into their life. And even if they tried to turn away from it, that light never dimmed. It stayed. It glowed. It whispered in their darkness, reminding them of what they once knew and feared. They thought forgetting you would bring peace, but it brought restlessness. They believed moving on would silence the memories, but instead, it amplified them. And that's because what you gave wasn't something temporary. It was eternal. You didn't just pass through their life like a stranger. You left a piece of your spirit behind, a spark that still burns even in your absence. And now, in the quiet, in the moments where they're alone with their thoughts, that spark is catching fire. Not to burn them, but to illuminate what they've been avoiding all this time. The truth of what you meant. There's no escaping a connection written by divine hands. They can travel far, bury themselves in distractions, even surround themselves with new faces. But they'll always find pieces of you in unexpected places. That's not nostalgia. It's spiritual gravity. You represented something their soul had been longing for long before they ever met you. And even though their conscious mind may have resisted it, their deeper self always knew. You were a mirror, a catalyst, a messenger. You stirred the parts of them they were afraid to explore. And God keeps reminding them, because your role in their journey was never random. There's a sacred tension in all of this, a pull between what was and what still could be. A dance between regret and realization. And while they may not show it outwardly, inside, they are wrestling with the magnitude of your absence. It haunts them, not because you were loud, but because you were real. Realness doesn't fade. It echoes. Your love, your words, your presence, they echo in their mind. It's in the spaces between conversations, in the silence after laughter, in the stillness that follows movement. Every attempt to forget is met with another reminder that you were never meant to be erased. You see, when God marks a connection as sacred, it doesn't vanish with time. It deepens. And the further they try to run, the more that connection reveals itself in subtle, undeniable ways. It's not punishment. It's purpose. You were meant to shake their foundation, to disrupt their comfort zone, to stretch their soul toward truth. And even though they weren't ready then, God is preparing them now. The whispers they hear, the flashes of you in their dreams, the coincidences that bring your name back to their lips, none of it is accidental. It's divine choreography. There's a powerful beauty in being unforgettable, not because of vanity, but because of divine impact. You didn't force yourself into their life. You flowed in. You didn't demand their attention. You naturally held it. And now, in your absence, they realize how much space you actually filled. Emotional space, spiritual space, energetic space. You were a presence, not a placeholder. And that realization is setting in like a slow sunrise, gradual, undeniable, and filled with both warmth and ache. Because the more they remember, the more they understand. They tried to convince themselves that forgetting you was a sign of strength. But now they're learning that real strength lies in facing what you once ran from. And what they're facing now is not just a memory, it's the weight of a missed opportunity. They're being shown that their attempts to forget weren't about you. They were about the version of themselves they weren't ready to meet. You represented evolution, and evolution often begins with discomfort. But now, God is nudging them back to the source, back to the moment their heart first recognized yours. You were the soft place in their storm, the voice that didn't just hear their words but understood the silence between them. You didn't need explanations. You saw through their excuses, their patterns, their armor, and that kind of perception is hard to come by. It's sacred. And they're realizing that what you offered wasn't just affection, it was healing. It was presence. And no one else has shown up with that same frequency since. Because what you brought wasn't manufactured. It was divine. That's why they can't forget. That's why they feel you even now. Even if they never say it aloud, there's a silent conversation happening between their soul and yours. An exchange of energy that transcends words and logic. You feel them in your spirit because they're thinking of you. You sense their energy because they're still connected to yours. This isn't fantasy. It's frequency. And no matter how much they try to block it, it continues to flow because you're still a part of their journey, not to complete them, but to awaken them, not to fix them, but to remind them who they were always meant to be. They may have forgotten your birthday, but they remember your essence. They may have ignored your messages, but they can't silence your impact. They may have replaced you in photos, but not in memory. You are more than an experience. You are an encounter. And that encounter changed the trajectory of their inner world. You showed them what it looked like to be loved without condition, to be seen without judgment, to be held without demand. That kind of love doesn't just disappear. It lingers. It teaches. It transforms. And now they are transforming. Slowly, quietly, spiritually. God is rebuilding something within them, using the very parts of themselves you once touched. The tenderness, the vulnerability, the truth. It's all coming back. Not because they're trying, but because their soul is finally listening. And that's the power of your presence. You didn't just leave an impression. You left a blueprint, a path back to wholeness, a trail of light that still guides them, even in your absence. They didn't know that forgetting you would be like trying to forget the feeling of warmth in the sun after a long winter. They didn't expect that every time they moved forward, something would pull them back, not in punishment, but in remembrance. Because what you offered wasn't just a relationship, or a connection, or even affection. It was revelation. You revealed who they were becoming. You revealed what they could be if they stopped hiding behind fear. And every time they tried to suppress that revelation, God brought it back, louder, clearer, and more persistent. Any NTHE way you loved wasn't ordinary. It wasn't transactional. You didn't give to receive. You gave because that's who you are. And deep down, they recognized that. Even when they tried to overlook it, even when they told themselves it wasn't real, they knew. That's what haunts them. Not guilt, but the knowing, the awareness that you were different. That what they had with you wasn't surface level. It was spiritual. And you don't just forget the person who brought light into your darkness. You carry them with you, even when you pretend otherwise. They tried to cover up the connection with logic. They told themselves it wasn't practical, that it wasn't the right time, that it wasn't what they needed. But God doesn't operate on logic. He moves through purpose. And the purpose of your presence in their life is being revealed now in the places where they feel most lost. You were the compass. You were the grounding force. And now they're adrift without the steady beat of your energy, reminding them of who they are. Because when someone truly sees you, it's impossible to go back to living in a world where you feel invisible. They may have walked away thinking it was the best choice. They may have convinced themselves that silence would bring them peace. But silence has a way of echoing louder than words. And your name echoes through the corridors of their soul. They remember the way you said things no one else noticed. They remember the way you loved, even when you weren't loved back the same. They remember the way you showed up with your full heart, without conditions, without pretense. That kind of love doesn't leave easily. that kind of love becomes a teacher, a mirror, a reminder of what they've yet to grow into. And that's why the reminders keep coming. Not to torment them, but to guide them. You see, when someone's soul is ready to evolve, it will seek out the moments that cracked it open. You were one of those moments. Maybe the first. Maybe the only. And the divine won't let them forget until they extract the lesson. Until they honor what they once took for granted. That's why the energy keeps returning to them in waves. That's why your face still appears in dreams. That's why no matter who they meet, there's always something missing, because that missing piece is the truth you brought into their life. They didn't lose you by accident. They lost you by choice, and now they're facing the weight of that choice. It's not about punishment, it's about awakening. God is showing them what they pushed away, not to shame them, but to heal them. Because true healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from remembering what we tried to avoid. And now they're remembering everything. Your kindness, your presence, your depth, your silence. And that silence speaks volumes, because it's in your absence that they finally hear the truth of who you were to them. Sometimes the absence becomes the message. And right now, you are still speaking through the spaces you once filled. You are still speaking through the energy you left behind. You don't need to reach out. You don't need to prove your worth. Your silence is sacred. It's doing the work for you. God is using it to amplify your voice in their soul. Every time they try to quiet the memory, it rises again. Not to haunt, but to heal. Not to shame, but to soften. Your love is still ministering to them in ways you may never fully understand. There is a quiet unfolding happening in their life right now. A soft breaking. A realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they ran from the very thing they prayed for. And that realization stings. Because now they see the contrast. The difference between what you gave and what others bring. The difference between the depth of your connection and the hollowness of temporary fixes. They tried to forget, but now they're remembering in full color. The details, the feelings, the truth. And each reminder brings them closer to what they denied. They're not just remembering you, they're remembering themselves. The version of themselves that showed up when they were with you. The softness, the honesty, the hope. You brought out the parts of them that were buried under years of pain and pride. And now, in your absence, they miss who they were becoming when they were with you. Because your presence didn't just change their life, it changed their identity. You reminded them of who they really are. And no amount of forgetting can erase that kind of transformation. NNSO, don't underestimate the impact you had. Don't question whether you mattered. You did, more than they ever let on. More than they could understand at the time. And now, the understanding is unfolding like a sunrise on the horizon. Slow, undeniable, radiant. They can't run from the light anymore. They can't pretend you didn't matter. Because God has made it impossible to forget what was meant to be remembered. They are no longer able to hide from the truth. The distractions no longer satisfy. The replacements don't measure up. And the world they built without you feels strangely incomplete. That's because you weren't just a season in their life. You were a shift. A turning point. A divine appointment that planted seeds they weren't ready to nourish. And now, those seeds are growing in the cracks of their denial. Each reminder of you is a root pushing deeper into their soul, anchoring them to the truth they once tried to uproot. You were not forgettable. You were unforgettable in a way that doesn't shout. It lingers. You didn't need to leave scars to be remembered. You left peace. You left clarity. You left depth. And now, that very depth is what they find themselves craving in a world that feels increasingly shallow. They tried to trade soul for surface, truth for comfort, and what they found was emptiness. Because when someone's soul has tasted real, no amount of fake can fill the void. That's why they feel your presence even now. That's why forgetting you has become impossible. They're beginning to notice how different they were when they were around you. Not because you changed them, but because you allowed them to drop the performance, to breathe, to be seen. And that kind of safety, that kind of sacred space, it doesn't come often. And it definitely doesn't get forgotten. They may not say it, but they feel it. They feel the absence of being seen without having to explain, of being accepted without having to earn it. You offered that. You embodied that. And now, it's become the measure against which they compare everything else. And the irony? They were the ones who pushed it away. Not because you weren't worthy, but because they didn't believe they were. That's the part that hurts them the most now. Not losing you, but losing themselves in the process of pushing you away. Because you didn't just walk beside them, you reminded them of their light. And now, they're walking in the shadows of their own choices, trying to piece together a path back to who they were becoming when they were with you. God doesn't allow divine connections to fade easily. He will use everything, memories, dreams, signs, even silence, to bring clarity. And right now, their life is full of echoes. Echoes of your voice, your spirit, your energy. Every attempt to block you out has only brought you closer. Because you weren't meant to disappear. You were meant to disrupt, to inspire, to awaken. And your role in their life was never about permanence. It was about purpose. And that purpose is unfolding, whether they acknowledge it or not. They may be in another relationship. They may appear to have moved on. But even there, your shadow follows, not to haunt them, but to remind them of what alignment really feels like. They may smile in pictures, but their spirit remembers who made them feel seen without posing. They may talk about future plans, but deep down, they still revisit the moments that were never fully closed. You see, forgetting you was never the plan. It was a reaction to fear, to pressure, to not being ready. But readiness doesn't erase what's been written on the heart. They're feeling the weight of that now. And it's not just sadness, it's reverence. Reverence for what they had. Reverence for the connection they couldn't understand in real time. They're not haunted by your memory. They're humbled by it. Because what they once saw as too much was actually what they needed most. Your emotions, your passion, your depth. It wasn't a flaw. It was the divine showing up in a way their soul had never encountered before. And now, they crave what they once rejected. And you didn't lose them. They lost access to the most authentic version of themselves that only you were able to mirror. And it's that version they miss the most, because you didn't just love them, you reminded them of how to love themselves, not the filtered version, the real one, the one that dared to be soft in a hard world, the one that wanted to believe in magic again, the one that trusted something deeper than logic. And now, without you, they're realizing how rare that feeling truly was. They tried to forget because remembering hurt too much. But the forgetting hurt more, because they weren't just leaving behind a person. They were walking away from alignment, from truth, from the one place where they didn't have to perform. And now, they long for that space. They long for the connection that didn't demand perfection, only presence. And no matter how far they go, they find themselves circling back to the one truth they tried to run from. You mattered more than they ever admitted. And maybe they won't come back. Maybe the chapter is closed in the physical realm. But your imprint remains. Your energy is still doing its work. It's still unfolding in the background of their life, showing up in their growth, their healing, their remembering. Because divine connections don't vanish. They evolve. And while you may be silent, your essence still speaks. It still moves through their decisions. It still hums in the background of their most honest moments. There's something poetic about the way your spirit lives in their quiet. In the stillness of their thoughts, when no one's watching, when they're not performing for the world, they feel you. Not because they haven't moved forward in life, but because some energies refuse to be replaced. They've tried. They've really tried to put the pieces back together without you. But the more they try to build a life that forgets you, the more they find themselves longing for the peace that only your presence carried. You became their mirror, their muse, their divine pause. In you, they glimpsed the version of themselves that felt freer, more honest, more alive. And although they weren't ready to hold that mirror up forever, they now understand it wasn't you they feared. It was the reflection, the vulnerability, the truth. And now, every time they're reminded of you, it's not about what could have been, it's about what still lingers. The work of your energy continues in their life, like a quiet wave that never stops returning to shore. God reminds them because He's still working. He's still softening their heart, still stretching their understanding, still preparing them for what they couldn't grasp when you were there. Divine timing doesn't always look like reunion. It often looks like inner transformation. And while you may not see their healing firsthand, your presence is deeply woven into it. You weren't just a part of their story. You were the turning point. And no matter how much they tried to pretend otherwise, that kind of influence cannot be unremembered. They've looked for you in other faces. Not consciously, perhaps, but energetically. That same warmth, that same calm, that same deep recognition that only comes once or twice in a lifetime. And every time they think they've found it, they feel the contrast. Because what you offered wasn't based on charm or convenience, it was anchored in spirit. You offered something sacred, something that required honesty, presence, and surrender. And now they understand how rare that truly is. NNBUT. This isn't about proving your value. It's about reclaiming your peace. Knowing that while they wrestled with the weight of forgetting, you carried the burden of being remembered. You were the one who stayed emotionally honest while they hid. You were the one who believed when they doubted. And even in the silence, you remained true to your spirit. That's what makes you unforgettable. Not drama, not pain, but depth. You never had to force it. You were simply yourself. And that self was enough to echo in someone's soul for a lifetime. Your job now isn't to wonder if they'll return. It's to understand why they never could truly let you go. The soul remembers what the mind tries to erase. And in this sacred remembering, something divine is happening, not just for them, but for you. Because you too are being reminded that your love was real, that your intuition was right, that your presence was a gift, not a mistake. God is not just working on them, He's honoring you. Every time they think of you, something shifts. And they may never tell you this, but their world is still touched by your energy. They replay your words. They revisit your smile. They feel your forgiveness even from afar. They know you offered something most people spend their lives chasing, and now they carry that knowledge like a quiet truth, unspoken but undeniable. Because forgetting you was never an option, not truly, not spiritually in. You may never receive the apology you deserve, But rest assured, the realization is already happening. And it's deeper than words. It's a soul-level reckoning. They tried to move on from you, but they can't move on from the person they were when they were loved by you. And maybe that's the most powerful reminder of all. You were a light, and they still walk with the echo of that light today. God keeps reminding them, because their soul still needs the truth you carried. And even if your paths never cross again, your presence has already done its work. You were unforgettable not because you demanded to be remembered, but because you lived with such presence that your absence could never silence your impact. This wasn't just love, it was a divine assignment, and even though they tried to forget you, God never allowed it, because you were meant to awaken, to shift, to open the heart of someone who didn't know how to hold what was real. And that awakening, it's still unfolding. NNSO, stand tall in your knowing. You were never too much. You were never the problem. You were the presence that changed everything. And even though they walked away, the truth is they never stopped carrying you. They tried to forget you, but God kept reminding them,